Gonna start. There's some housekeeping that we have to do, and then Bart will do the introduction. The housekeeping is that there are still slots open if grad students would like to talk. Vanna right now is by herself on March 4th. There's another 20-minute slot there if someone wants to volunteer for that. And then there's a whole seminar open slots on April 1st. So you can do a 20-minute, two 20-minute talks or one 40-minute talk. And then we're actually booked for the rest of the semester. So that's kind of nice. We have 3 more external speakers coming in at the end of the semester. And then we have a visiting scholar coming in 2 weeks. John Blanc is coming in. Okay, so that's the first thing. And the second thing is that if you haven't voted for the external speakers who we're going to invite in, so that's someone outside of the state, we're bringing in probably at the end of the semester, vote before midnight tonight, and then we're going to tally all the votes tomorrow morning and start sending out invitations based on that. Okay. Does anyone have any questions about those two things?
Can we vote more than once?
Not vote. Well, that's why I asked for emails so that you cannot vote more than once. I did not trust any of you to vote not more than once. Okay. We can change your mind. You could actually, if you want to revote with your thing and tell me, I'll use the most newest one. I'll use the newest one. Okay. Can people online hear us? Can people online, you want to do a thumbs up if you can hear us? Somebody? Awesome. Okay. Thank you very much. Great. Okay. So then we're going to turn it over to Bart.
Thank you so much. I wanted to underscore what Justin just said, particularly for graduate students. It's a really awesome opportunity in a friendly environment, get some feedback. For the voting, I want to know about the hanging chads. Do those count?
Maybe.
Okay.
You're dating yourself.
Well, they're fair enough. I'm oldie. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Kiera, my doctoral student. She's doctoral candidate in sociocultural anthropology here at KU. Has had a really interesting academic career, chock full of all sorts of things. I'm going to read this almost verbatim. She graduated in 2019 from Florida Gulf Coast University with a BA in anthropology, minor in Spanish, as well as interdisciplinary studies. During this time, she served as the Anthro Club president, the social chair of the Phi Eta Sigma National Honor Society, was awarded Seidler Undergraduate Scholarly Collaboration, where she conducted survey-based research on perceptions of American identity and the use of language in the U.S. with her mentor, Dr. Myra Mendable. She then went on to serve in the Peace Corps in Ecuador, teaching with the TEFL program, the Teaching English as a Foreign Language program. She subsequently was a refugee mentor coordinator through AmeriCorps Vista in Florida. Subsequently, she graduated from Illinois State University in 2023 with a Master's of Science in Anthropology and Applied Community and Economic Development. During her graduate time at Illinois State, she was the president of the Applied Community and Economic Development Student Association and a member of the Graduate Student Council. She worked as a research analyst for the Illinois Sentencing Policy Advisory Council, and was the first anthropologist to be hired by the state of Illinois to conduct qualitative interviews with formerly incarcerated persons and stakeholders of the criminal legal system. She assisted in quantitative data analysis for the Illinois Department of Corrections, the DOC, worked with criminal history records information, then began publishing. Her first paper came out entitled Developing Qualitative Research, Questions for Illinois Post-Release Prison Analysis. That was published based on research with Dr. Catherine Bocanegra while she was at the university. Here at the University of Kansas, she, as some of you know, is recipient of very prestigious Madison and Lila Self Graduate Fellowship. She's been awarded a number of grants, including Thinker through Center for Latin American Caribbean Studies. She was awarded a Foreign Language Area Studies Fellowship to study Brazilian Portuguese through the Department of Education. Her current research, which we will be hearing a bit about today, really emphasizes the topics intersection of legal violence, migration governance, questions of citizenship. She is currently conducting ethnological research on issues of refugee integration in 3 primary areas within Ecuador. They are Quito, Guayaquil, and Puyo. So without further ado, we will now hear from Kiera.
Great. Thank you, Bart. I really appreciate the introduction and the opportunity to talk about my research today. My name is Kiera Eckhardt. I'm a doctoral candidate in anthropology at the University of Kansas, and my presentation is going to look at ethnographic perspectives on migration in Quito and Guayaquil, Ecuador specifically, where I've been conducting research for my dissertation. With regards to migration, not only does the country of Ecuador host the 4th largest population of Venezuelan refugees in South America, but it is also the only country in the world to have a universal citizenship policy. This presentation explores the lived experiences of migrants and community members in the context of this policy, but also uses data to explore what it could mean for humanitarian migration practices moving forward. I will start the presentation by giving an overview of Ecuador in the context of the Venezuelan refugee crisis, followed by descriptions of my field experience in Quito and Guayaquil, and ultimately conclude, based on the data and narrative shared, if the universal citizenship policy is substantive or rhetorical in nature, and what other features play a significant role in Ecuador's migration system, and what this could mean for the country and humanitarian migration practices moving forward. So Ecuador is a country located on the Pacific Northwest coast of South America, with Colombia to the northeast and Peru cupping a majority of the country to the south. It hosts a population of 18.1 million people and is a former Spanish colony, once a part of the Viceroyalty of Peru. The country obtained its independence from Spain in 1822 after winning the Battle of Pichincha in the Central Andes Mountains. During the country's coca export boom in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, while many Ecuadorians emigrated to other countries such as Spain and the United States, other nationalities, such as the Lebanese, began entering Ecuadorian cities like Guayaquil, becoming merchants and traders. The term Lebanese is said to broadly apply to Arab-speaking immigrants whose ancestry can be traced to Syria, Palestine, or Lebanon. It is unknown how many total Lebanese migrants entered Ecuador during this period, but their economic and political influence quickly scaled. In 1991, for example, approximately 15,000 Lebanese lived in Quito, and in the 1990s, 2 Ecuadorian presidents were of Lebanese descent. In the year 2000, Ecuador transitioned its currency to the US dollar. This led many Peruvians and Colombians to immigrate to the country, with 150,000 Colombian migrants entering between 2000 and 2005 alone. From 2008 to 2016, there was an increase in Haitian and Cuban migration, which is thought to be a result of the universal citizenship policy, which was incorporated under Ecuadorian President Rafael Correa in 2008. Since 2017, Ecuador has passed an organic law of human mobility, which recognizes the free movement of South Americans across the continent, and there has been a notable increase in applications for refugee status in Ecuador, as well as refugees migrating to Ecuador since. According to the Friedrich Ebert Foundation in Ecuador, and using data from the International Protection Authority at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Human Mobility, It was determined that between 1989 to 2020, the countries whose nationals submitted the largest numbers of refugee applications in Ecuador were the republics of Colombia, Cuba, Haiti, Venezuela, and Peru, which accounted for 97.8% of the total applications submitted for asylum or refugee status in Ecuador. It's important to note that while international humanitarian aid organizations utilize terms such as refugee and asylum when referring to migrants in Ecuador, the country itself does not delineate between the two terms and will refer to both refugees and asylees as refugees. Between 2018 and 2022, 70% of asylum applications or individuals who were already physically present in the country of Ecuador were from Venezuela. 28% were from Colombia. However, in the year 2021 alone, only 456 applicants were granted refugee status, with an overwhelming majority being granted to Colombians. It is postulated that this may be due in part to rampant xenophobia and discrimination against Venezuelans. To put things further into context, following the presidencies of Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro in the 20th century, the country of Venezuela experienced an inflated and misused government system that was unable to heal social divisions and ease the economic crisis of the global price of oil plummeting in 2014. In 2018, the presidential election in Venezuela became contentious when assertions arose that the election was rigged in favor of the incumbent, Nicolas Maduro. This led the European Union, United States, and other Western powers to denote the opposition candidate, Juan Guaido, as the acting president of Venezuela in place of Maduro. Due to the absence of a re-election, economic sanctions against the Maduro presidency persisted and affected the political economy of Venezuela dramatically. A significant decline in living conditions and virtually non-existent access to affordable health care and resources have led many Venezuelans to leave the country. According to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, 6 million Venezuelan citizens have migrated abroad into other countries within Latin America since the crisis first began in 1999. In a speech to the United Nations General Assembly in Italy in 2018, Ecuadorian President Lenin Moreno stated that in all of South America, Ecuador is the country with the highest proportion of Colombian, Venezuelan, and Haitian refugees. By the time of Moreno's speech in 2018, over 1 million Venezuelan refugees had entered the country of Ecuador, with upwards of 250,000 permanently resettling there. To date, there are 7.9 million Venezuelan refugees and migrants worldwide. 84%, or 6.7 million, are in Latin America and the Caribbean. Colombia hosts the largest population of Venezuelan refugees with 2.9 million. Peru hosts the second largest with 1.5 million. Brazil hosts the third with 510,000. And Ecuador, despite being approximately 30 times smaller in landmass than Brazil and 4 times smaller than both Colombia and Peru, hosts the fourth largest population with 474.9 thousand. In 2019, according to the Instituto Nacional Estadística y Censos in Ecuador, 76% of recorded Venezuelans in the country were between 18 and 55 years old, with 21% being minors and almost 11% being under the age of 10, meaning that a significant share of Venezuelans in the country were school-aged children. Considering occupations, in 2022, political scientist Gioconda Herrera confirmed previous surveys that Colombians and Venezuelans worked predominantly in the retail sector in the country, but secondarily, that Colombians worked primarily in manufacturing and hospitality industries, while Venezuelans were more likely to work in the construction sector. It is also noted that there are more Colombian than Venezuelan migrants in the agricultural sector and more migrants working in hospitality and retail sectors than Ecuadorian citizens. Concurrently, to legally obtain documentation when entering the country of Ecuador, One must either A, obtain a UNASUR visa when entering the country if you're a citizen of another Latin American country, B, pay for a tourist visa and entry fees, or C, obtain the exceptional humanitarian visa when entering the country if you consider yourself to be a refugee or were forced to migrate. If you reside within the country of Ecuador and did not pay for a tourist visa and entry fees or apply for refugee or asylum status within 90 days of entering the country, the only way to obtain documentation is to physically leave the country, then return to a visa checkpoint to obtain one of the three aforementioned visas. After obtaining legal documentation to enter Ecuador, Herrera claims that there are no legal barriers to accessing healthcare or enrolling in education opportunities within the country, which is also stipulated under the Universal Citizenship Policy. Both costs are said to be taken on by the Ecuadorian government, wherein, for example, the World Bank estimated that the number of Venezuelan migrant outpatient consultations equated to 1.3% of total consultations, so 1% of all consultations, had an estimated fiscal cost of $39.1 million in 2019. To a similar extent, the World Bank estimated that the cost of schooling for Venezuelan children in Ecuador represents an additional $21 million per year based on 2019 data. While these numbers are sizable, in an online news article by Refugee International, various narratives and polling data about the experiences of Colombian refugees in Ecuador have surfaced. Refugee International notes that while non-governmental organizations like HIAS Ecuador claim to offer comprehensive services to refugees no matter their migration status, the lived experience of clients tells a different story. According to surveys by the Migration Policy Institute in 2019, Colombian refugees in Ecuador have lost confidence in local authorities and aid organizations. Roughly 36% of respondents, for example, distrusted migration organizations, while their distrust in the UNHCR in particular increased from less than 15% in 2009 to over 30% of individuals distrusting the organization in 2019. Data regarding Venezuelan experiences with refugee services and integration is even less reported. With this being said, protests and forced removals have also been targeting Venezuelan migrants, such as in cities like Ambato in August 2018, Ibarra in January 2019, and in the capital city of Quito in 2020, where Venezuelans were threatened and attacked in public spaces. While the increase in violence and xenophobia against migrants in Ecuador has yet to be resolved, officials also worry that Ecuador may be becoming the next trafficking corner due to its high frequency of remittances, immigration, selective regularizing of citizens, and constantly changing visa requirements, leading many to wonder about the future of the country. As this research is ongoing, I can offer a snapshot of the pulse of what migrants and community members are saying about migration in the country right now. This includes perceptions of migrants, perceptions about migrants, and perceptions regarding the Ecuadorian government. In 2020, I joined the Peace Corps and served in Ecuador as a teaching English as a foreign language volunteer. While there, I lived with a host family and took public transportation to work every day. While completing my Peace Corps training in the capital city of Quito, I recall the graffiti that was painted on the walls at the entrance of the neighborhood I stayed in. The neighborhood was called Tumbaco, and every day that I came and went from work, painted in red at the entrance of the neighborhood, it said, "Venezuelans, go home." Within the first week of arriving, my host mother also told me not to go out at night because a young woman had had her throat slit by a Venezuelan man just weeks before I had come. I served my time in Ecuador, also spending a few weeks in the Amazonian city of Puyo before being emergency evacuated due to the COVID-19 pandemic. When I returned to the United States, I worked in refugee services, completed my master's in anthropology, and started my PhD at the University of Kansas. with support from the Tinker Field Research Grant through the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies at the University of Kansas, I returned to Quito for the first time since being evacuated. On this particular research trip in 2024, I was assessing migrants' ability to access resources in the country, and through background interviews with 12 refugee service providers, I learned that service providers would refer clients to several organizations at the same time, as opposed to there being one central provider offering comprehensive services, which is more common in the United States. I also learned that a majority of service providers in Quito were either non-state sponsored or international aid organizations. While visiting a legal clinic in Quito, I learned that in 2023, Ecuador had also passed a human mobility bill, which requires migrants to register within 90 days of entering the country or they could face deportation. While it was not clear if this applies to ex post facto cases, service providers expressed concern that the bill and potential deportations would significantly disrupt community integration efforts. In conversations with Ecuadorian citizens, I also noted that they were tracking this change in migration policy as well. During this research trip, there was also a car bomb that went off in front of my hotel, and despite checking the news media every day for months, it was never reported in the news. In June 2025, I advanced to PhD candidacy and returned to Quito with support from the Madison and Lila Self-Graduate Fellowship at the University of Kansas. While in Quito, I collected a total of 25 interviews and stayed in the historic downtown of the capital city. I had no need for public transportation or Uber, though I did ride the metro a few times, due in part to the fact that I was able to walk to parks in the city center on foot. Of the 25 individuals I interviewed, 13 were male, 12 identified as female. 5 individuals said that they were migrants, 3 being from Venezuela, 1 individual being from Colombia, and 1 individual being from Cuba. 3 of the people I interviewed self-identified as being indigenous, and 17 of the 25 individuals were Ecuadorian citizens. I also let's see. Here's a breakdown of their age ranges. So it was pretty comprehensive, a majority of individuals being between 18 and 29 years of age, but also between 50 and 59. But having a nice distribution there. And I also collected information regarding occupation and descent, or if the individual not just identified as indigenous, but also Moreno, Blanco, or other identifications. So having outlined the age distribution of participants, I would like to turn to the interview data itself to examine perspectives that emerged. The first individual I've listed is an Ecuadorian woman from Quito, and during the conversation, these excerpts are going to be in Spanish on the left and English on the right, but I asked, so do you have an opinion about immigration in Ecuador? About immigration here? Yes. No, there's already a lot of Venezuelan migration. And is it easy to come to Ecuador for immigrants? Yes. And in your opinion, why? Let's say because we are better off. Ecuador isn't really such a bad place, but most migrants come here. Is immigration a problem in the country? Yes. Why? Because most of them came to lower the job market a bit. So they charge what they want and they are given what they want, but not us. At least for me, it did affect me that migration is here. Do you have an opinion about the president or the government right now? No, because it's almost the same as all governments. They do nothing. Nothing? We might have more crime. This is an interview with an Ecuadorian man in Quito. I asked at some point, do you have an opinion about immigration in Ecuador? And he said, immigration in Ecuador, the truth is there are 2 ways, the positive way and the negative way. The way of immigrating on the right side with papers and the way on the left side. but I would say that there should be the possibility for people to go through both ways because there are many people who suffer here in this country. And since there is no work, that is the reason. So there are women with children, mothers, fathers who have the dream of working and moving forward to improve their home. So they start migrating through the left side. That is why there are deaths, because people have to experience terrible things. Uh, is there racism or xenophobia against Venezuelans or immigrants in Ecuador? The truth is, I've seen that there is. With those who are rude, they don't have the proper respect, the right way to express themselves to people. So I've seen that they speak to them or hit them like that because they are abusive. I think it's better that since they are from another country, they have to respect the country they come from, the one they enter. So what's interesting between the last excerpt and this is that in the last excerpt, the woman I spoke to was saying that the economy is better off in Ecuador, but migrants coming in are lowering their prices for offering services, which is affecting Ecuadorian citizens. Meanwhile, in this excerpt, we have this person that's saying that there aren't a lot of jobs. Something that was really interesting stems from my interview with this indigenous woman. So during our conversation, she shared, my occupation is making crafts, all woven from muyo. It is a traditional art of the Saraguros, passed down from our ancestors, and it is part of our clothing. Now I make little models like this to sell commercially. And eventually we moved into me asking her about immigration. So do you have an opinion about immigration in Ecuador? She was like, immigration? And I was like, mm-hmm. She's like, no. And I was like, what do you think about immigration? I don't know. Sad. And I asked, is it sad? And she said, sad, yes. I asked, is it a problem in Ecuador? She said, problems in Ecuador? Lack of work. And I was like, because of work? She was like, yes. In extension, I asked, is there racism or xenophobia in Ecuador? And she said, yes, there is racism here. Racism against us Hunas, indigenous people. Yes, there is racism. Why? Sometimes they don't value us as we are, that we go to buy some part, to do something in the office. They don't attend to us soon because we are indigenous. Yes, what do you think about the government of Ecuador? She shared that he fulfills what he offered. I said, the government or the president? She asked, are they not both in charge? I said, President Noboa, what do you think, the current president of Ecuador? And she said that he fulfills what he has offered and that it goes well with what he has offered. He has to deliver. What really stuck out to me with this interview with this indigenous woman was that she emphasized in her interview as compared to my interviews with other indigenous persons, they offered the same remark where they would answer my questions about migration, but as we talked for at lengths of time, the emphasis went back to the xenophobia and racism that they experienced as indigenous persons. And so it's this idea of centering one's own experience and that coming out in ethnographic interviews and in the data as well. So while they were able to answer my questions and acquiesce what I was asking at the end of the day, while Ecuadorian citizens were also talking about their lived experiences with migration in the country, it was interesting to consider and to be able to work with some indigenous persons to obtain their perspective as well with regards to Ecuador. And at the same time, there are many indigenous rights movements that have been going on in the continent. And right after we finished recording this interview, I was talking to the same woman and telling her about how I was going to Bolivia after my time in Quito. And at the time in Bolivia, she almost got excited because they were actually closing the roads down because there are protests that were blocking traffic in the roads, and it was the indigenous rights movement making its way down to Bolivia. And so we were able to talk about that at length as well, and just how it's manifesting in other countries outside of Ecuador, this indigenous rights movement and solidarity. Okay. So moving to this interview with a Colombian male in Quito. I didn't put this in here, but this gentleman came up to me when I was sitting in the park because towards the end of my field work, I knew so many people in Quito from my time serving in the Peace Corps and prior research trips that I would sit in the public spaces and I would know a good amount of people that would walk by. And so I felt really safe in Quito, especially in the historic center. And so I was sitting in the park and this guy came up to me and he asked if I had some change I could lend him. And I was like, yeah, also, and then went through the whole informed consent process about what I was doing and asked if I could interview him too. And he was like, yes. And when we started the interview, he told me it was his birthday. And when I was preparing this presentation, I was listening to the recordings and thinking back, and I was wondering if it really was his birthday or if he was just saying that. And I totally believed him. So in the transcript as I'm reading it, he's like, "Yeah, I'm 25 today." He was like, "It's my birthday." I'm like, "Oh my gosh, happy birthday!" Like very excited. And then I look back and I wonder if he was pulling my leg. But regardless, so I asked him about what his occupation is. And he said, "What is my occupation? I am a veterinary assistant, a dog groomer, but for now I dedicate myself to singing." I said, "I see. And do you have an opinion about migration in Ecuador?" And he said, "About migration? Uh, yes. I really like traveling, migrating, yes, but my opinion on migration is that sometimes you end up wasting your time because in many countries you arrive with certain expectations and they aren't what you hope for. I mean, sometimes you go looking for work in some places and you don't find it, and then you end up worse off than when you came. I mean, you come looking for something and leave worse." And I asked him, was it easy to come to Ecuador? For me, it's easy. I always hop on trucks. Whatever the vehicle, I like traveling a lot. I asked him if he has a cedula or their version of a passport, translated to like an ID card. My ID, it was stolen in Ibarra, but I do know it. And I asked, is it easy to get an ID? And he said, I have to go to Colombia to get it. I have to go to Colombia to get it. Honestly, I do want to get it to go to Brazil. And then, as I did in all of my interviews, I asked about what the most dangerous city in Ecuador was. In general, there were a lot of questions that were specific about migration in Quito, migration in Guayaquil, perceptions from people residing in Quito about migration in Guayaquil, for example, because my ultimate goal is to conduct an ethnology of this tripart study of Quito, Guayaquil, and Puyo. Quito being the capital city in the Andes, Guayaquil being the most populated port city on the coast, and then Puyo being the most populated city in the Amazon. So I asked which city is the most dangerous in Ecuador, and he said, for me, the one I've been to, Guayaquil. I said, why Guayaquil? He said, insecurity, violence. Over there, they will kill you for nothing. I said, violence from whom? He said, violence. And I was like, violence. And he said, between gangs. And I was like, between gangs? And he was like, gangs, exactly, a group. Gangs. And where are the gangs from? And he said, I mean, each gang member has their own group, like in Colombia, an armed group. Something else that is interesting to note in other interviews with individuals about uh, Guayaquil and safety in Guayaquil, I also heard a story from an individual who shared that similar to what the Colombian male that I just shared an excerpt from was saying, that they'll kill people for nothing. The story that I heard from an indigenous man in Guayaquil, or sorry, an indigenous man in Quito, was that they'll see that you have money and they'll strap a bomb to your car just because. And there were a lot of stories like that. I would say my time in Quito was very rich ethnographically, and I am actually still working through that data. But in summary, and from the excerpts that I just offered, there seems to be a general lack of work in Quito and generalizing that to the country of Ecuador, but that Ecuador is still considered to be better off financially than other South American countries, that there is xenophobia against migrants, particularly Venezuelans. Though this is notably experienced by indigenous persons within the country as well, there's also apathy or some indifference for political institutions. And Guayaquil, my second field site, was also noted in an overwhelming majority of interviews as being the most dangerous city in the country, based on both lived experiences and what informants stated was widely shared in news media. So turning to the second field site of Guayaquil, Ecuador, while Quito is the capital and hosts a population of 1.76 million, Guayaquil is the most populated city in the country with 2.65 million inhabitants. It is located on the coast and is a major port city of the country. While I am currently transcribing data from my latest research trip to Guayaquil, from which I returned last month, I can offer a snapshot of the interviews that were able to take place. In total, I collected 25 interviews again. 14 of the individuals I interviewed were male, 11 individuals were female. I spoke to one individual who was a migrant from Venezuela, and the other 24 interviews were with Ecuadorian citizens. And while I am still transcribing the data and not able to share excerpts like I did for my time in Quito, some general things I have been taking away looking at that data is that the transition to the US dollar, going back to the history of Ecuador that I shared at the beginning, the historical background, that transition to the US dollar is considered to be very appealing to migrants, is what's being shared in the data from Guayaquil. That because Guayaquil is a large port city, it's considered to be more appealing to migrants as well, for travel, ease of travel, but also the economy being better in Guayaquil in general. That there was mention of the universal citizenship policy without me asking point blank asking people about it. People would bring it up on their own, but also this idea that Ecuador has a lax migration system, and so that people, if they choose to, can travel through alternative and non-legal means and still be able to make their way through the country easily. And so that being a reason why many individuals would migrate to and through Ecuador, but also that Guayaquil is also very dangerous. Something really interesting that I hope to be able to present in future presentations on this topic as that depth of data, I'm able to get more into it and cultivate a presentation that specifically looks at my time in Guayaquil, is that there was a lot of mention about there being a lot of gangs in Ecuador, and I would ask people to, I guess you could say, name as many as they could off the top of their head. And there were five main gangs that people would mention. And when I would ask people about what gang members looked like or how they could tell someone was in a gang, that's where it got a little eerie, because they would say you can never tell, you just don't know until something happens. So this research has been graciously supported by the Masson and Lila Self-Graduate Fellowship, the Tinker Field Research Grant through the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies, and the Carol D. Clark Field Research Award through the Department of Anthropology at the University of Kansas. And so I wanted to say thank you to these entities, but also thank you to you all for listening to my research and for this opportunity to help develop these ideas further. Here are some of my selected references, and that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, so maybe we'll do some questions from the audience. If anyone online wants to ask a question, maybe put it in the chat and then we can unmute you and you could ask a question as well. So does anyone in the audience want to say something?
Well, I just have a very basic question. I am curious in hearing more about the concept of universal citizenship and what that applies in Ecuador, what that implies in Ecuadorian policy.
Definitely. I appreciate the question. So, in preliminary research, before I even advanced to candidacy in one of the chapters in my dissertation, I actually conducted a discursive analysis of Ecuador's constitution to look at what universal citizenship actually means and if it offers a legal recourse for migrants and particularly refugees in the country. And what I was able to determine was that it is one article in the 2008 Constitution of Ecuador which since 2008, when the Constitution was put into place by Rafael Correa, which is this whole movement, people being pro Correa supporters, that it's Article, I believe, 413, and it literally states that Ecuador supports the free movement of all inhabitants of the planet. And so what's interesting is that migration policy within the Constitution isn't as developed as it's being portrayed to be in speeches to the United Nations and in news articles and in the way it's discussed more mainstreamly. That the Constitution itself, it just says that the country supports the free movement of all inhabitants of the planet. Whereas, like in 2018, President Lenin Moreno, in an address to the United Nations General Assembly in Italy, he's saying, well, universal citizenship policy gives migrants the same access to healthcare and education services as Ecuadorian citizens. However, that's not uh, outlined in the Constitution, essentially.
So just a quick follow-up, just to clarify, so Ecuadorian citizenship is still based on place of birth, or are there other criteria?
Oh, so there's definitely birthright citizenship in Ecuador. They also did expand that policy for, I believe that was the goal of, let me think of the specific year. I believe it was 2017, and then again in, I want to say 2023, that's the only time that there were amendments to the 2008 Constitution. And in the 2017 amendments, that's where they expanded not just the birthright citizenship section, but because so many Ecuadorians had immigrated to, say, the United States and Spain to kind of stimulate their return to the country, that they extended that. It was also thought that that's the reason why the universal citizenship policy exists as well. So they extended citizenship, this organic human mobility law, where individuals in South America have an easier legal route to move to Ecuador, and that's thought to be due to many Ecuadorians immigrating to other countries. So it's almost like an expansion of the universal citizenship policy, but keeping that policy the same and adding this organic human mobility law on top of it.
Hi, Kiera, it's Ted. I'm just wondering, where are you now, and are you in Ecuador or going back there soon?
Yeah, thanks for your question, Ted. I am in transit conducting research, but it's so nice to hear from you. Yes, my next field site hopefully will be Puyo, Ecuador, which would be the third and final site for my data collection, as this is a tripartite model. So the first phase was in Quito, Ecuador in the Andes, the second phase in Guayaquil in the coast, and the third being in Puyo, Ecuador in the Amazon, the Pastaza province of the Amazon.
Thank you, Kiera. This is Bart. Given your longstanding interest in U.S. policy, I'm curious, what can you say that your study reveals about what the United States is going through currently in terms of immigration, tearing the country apart, and also the invasion of Venezuela, a country that you mentioned multiple times? The big, huge question, I know, but why is this consequential for U.S. policy?
Definitely. So to answer that question, I would go back to my experience working in refugee services. A majority of my clients when I was working in refugee services were from the Democratic Republic of Congo. And so a majority of the individuals I worked with uh, had spent upwards of 20 years of their lives in refugee camps. 20 years in a refugee camp waiting to be approved to go to a country that accepted them and their family members. And for the youth that I worked with, many of them were born in these refugee camps, and that was the only life that they had ever known. And so that really, to say motivated and inspired is an understatement, but it really is what pushed me to want to devote my life and my research to be able to find a way to streamline migration pragmatically in society to where that's not the case where people are spending 20 years and their entire life is based in a refugee camp. So that's what inspired me to do this research. I appreciate when I did my defense for candidacy, Bart asked a really great question, and he asked, do you want this research to be a window into migration in Ecuador or a mirror? And I would really like for this research to be able to do both, to be a case study of the migration system in Ecuador, a case study of, you could say, universal citizenship, the potentiality of it, but also for individuals to be able to look at this case study and then reflect on what's happening in their respective countries as well, and to see that it is eerily similar.
Thank you.
Does anyone online want to ask anything? Okay, then I have a question. Kiera, are you planning to talk on the record or off the record with any government officials in this field experience?
Right. Yeah, great question. I appreciate that question. When I initially started this research, I wanted it to be very government forward. And so I have spoken with officials on background for this project, and honestly to be determined with regards to creating reports, like when I was interviewing refugee service providers who work hand in hand with the Ecuadorian government in some instances, to hopefully be able to publish some reports with relation to this data and in collaboration with those service providers as well. So that would be something I would look forward to doing in the future if possible.
Awesome.
Got a question. The statistic you raised about the percentage of people that are using those outpatient medical appointments, is that equivalent to the percentage of migrants in the country? Like, it just seemed, you said 1%, and that seems dramatically low in comparison to the percentage of migrants in the country. And so, and also in your excerpts, nowhere did that come up that like migrants are a burden on the system. Is that kind of what you're seeing still? And I think just as like a North American perspective, that's often a consideration.
Yeah, I appreciate your question. Is this Kelsey by chance?
Lauren, sorry.
Lauren. Hi, Lauren. Oh, hey, Lauren. I'm so sorry. Hi, Lauren. I hope you're doing well. No, I appreciate the question. So the 1.3% of consultations, of all consultations, this is based on survey data from 2019, and it's from an international aid organization that was conducting that survey. And so they're saying out of all consultations from the data that they were able to acquire, 1.3% were from refugees specifically. So not necessarily migrants, but refugees in particular, because there are many individuals who could be considered in that category of migrants, but may not self-identify. The other thing is they may not apply for refugee status and be documented as refugees. which could be why that percentage is so low. And I would say, with regards to migrants being a burden, not being a burden on certain systems, that I spoke I tried to speak objectively about that as this research is ongoing. And so I can't make any conclusive statement regarding that, but those listening could interpret that based off of their own research and lived experiences, definitely.
Thank you.
Here, as a follow-up to what Lauren just asked, if an individual goes to a health post in Ecuador, do they need to provide identification? And I presume so. And if they provide a Colombian ID, are they denied services? Or because I think that in part is related to the issue of they perceived as a burden or not. Maybe you don't have an answer to that.
No, actually, this is where it starts to get very intense. When I was in Quito, specifically the last time when I was conducting data right after I advanced to candidacy, it was scary because not just for health services, but now at the free legal clinics, which I had mentioned previously, you wouldn't need to show any sort of paperwork because in some instances that's why you're at the free legal clinic. But for medical services, even to check out at grocery stores, they're asking for IDs now. So they're starting to crack down on it. And that's because of the 2023 Human Mobility Bill, where this law had been incorporated where within 90 days of entering the country, you have to have some form of documentation. You need to register with the country or you would be deported. So what I'm really interested in is doing follow-up interviews with people and going back and asking people at organizations or entities where they are asking for those IDs, what systems they have in place if people do not have those IDs. So is it just they're denied from accessing those services, or is there a number that they call, for example? What is that looking like?
Awesome. Kiera, Brent has a message in the chat. Can you see that?
Could you read it out, perhaps?
Yes.
Everybody.
Brent, I know you haven't processed your Guayaquil data yet, but are you identifying any overarching patterns that'll inform your Puyo research?
You just mentioned some with the IDs, but I don't know if there's anything else, anything's kind of crystallizing for you.
I think something that is crystallizing is the idea of Guayaquil being very unsafe. And so even when I was interviewing people in Guayaquil, the people in Guayaquil were saying Guayaquil was unsafe. And I trying to think of how to word this. Let's just say I was told on multiple occasions to watch my back and to like watch who I spoke to. So with regards to Puyo, I think Josh Homan was. Yes, hello, Josh. So what's really exciting is that before I was even accepted to the University of Kansas, when I was serving in Peace Corps, I was in Puyo and I spoke with Josh Homan, who also does research in the Amazon of Ecuador, and we were both in Puyo at the same time. And so I would really like to work with Dr. Homan, for example, to develop that final phase of my dissertation research because he has a lot more experience in the area. And so with regards to anticipation for Puyo, still analyzing Guayaquil, I anticipate, though, especially with regards to Quito and the indigenous persons I was able to speak to, being more interested in talking about the racism and xenophobia they experience in the indigenous rights movement on the continent and in Ecuador. I anticipate that being true in Puyo as well, if I were to hypothesize.
Awesome. Okay. Are there any more questions in the audience or online for Kiera? All right. If not, let's give her one more thanks for giving the presentation. Thank you. Thank you very much, Kiera.
Thank you, guys.
And then we'll have our next seminar series in 2 weeks in the same room, John Blanc, I believe. And see you all there.